Welcome back to 7th Grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about slick racism. Jim Crow created a system of social and economic control based on racism. These laws created black neighborhoods, schools, and police strategies. Those Jim Crow laws were deemed unconstitutional and made illegal. It was the greatest racial psyop ever executed in American history. So, people often like to speak about how racism is over, black people shouldn't complain about anything, don't ask for your 40 acres and a mule. We hear this stuff a lot, and I clap back real hard, like a howitzer hard, when I hear that bullshit. Because I got receipts and I got evidence to show that racism is not done, and there is still a lot more work to be done. There are several different arenas or realms where you can see that racism is still alive and well. The home real estate market is one of those realms that exposes systemic racism. But what we're talking about here, before I dive into this, is that racism has gone from a overt appearance, activity, mindset to something that is clandestine. And as I was saying, the real estate market is one that exposes this systemic racism.
The redlining, the example you talked about with me personally.
Consider this. It existed before redlining because once slavery ended, there was no land given to the Negro.
Mm-hmm.
Europeans were given the incentive to come to America with the promise of land if they could go and grab it.
Whose land were they grabbing?
Native American land.
I have another question for you. At the end of the Civil War, did they punish any white man for owning slaves?
That's a good question. No.
Yeah. In fact, they received reparations for slaves. There was two things that happened. Insurance companies.
They were given compensation for
correct
what they lost economically.
Yeah, but was there anybody that was punished, had their land taken because they owned slaves? The Cherokee. That goes back to what we talked about in past podcasts, the Cherokee lottery. So what they did was the Cherokees that owned slaves, because they owned slaves, they took their land and they had lotteries and gave their land to white people. See, that is racism. that wasn't because like I said, the white people that owned slaves, their land wasn't taken. And when you talk about the Europeans coming over, you're talking about later on when they were like, hey, come on over, we got land for you. Well, whose land were they given? So literally, that they took land from the Cherokee, who could, some people say they're black, whatever. Some people just say they're Native American, whatever. But bottom line was, they were punished for doing the exact same thing that white people were doing, and they had their land taken. And I think the other part about, I think what makes racism so amazing is that even when something is done to you that's racist, you'll try to explain it away. That's when and go ahead and talk about the housing market. But like I said, when it happened to me, I'm like, oh yeah, man, it's because I'm young, or I'm this, or I'm how come I'm a bigger risk than somebody else, who is at the same stage in their life as me. So yeah, that's that part that, like, to deal with the racism, you have to rationalize it so you don't go crazy.
But now we're in this don't complain about it era that kind of mirrors the mindset that white people had during Jim Crow. And don't speak up, don't be an uppity Negro. There's always been that don't be an uppity Negro type of thing.
How about you're lucky to be here? That kind of thing.
Think of this as if you were invited to a dinner. And you're invited to a dinner and everybody goes in and they sit down. Everybody at the table is given their entrees, their main course, and dessert. And you've been sitting there the whole time and you're asking, hey, am I going to get some food? They're like, yeah, it's coming. So then you make it all the way and the dinner is finished and everybody's getting up and you still sit at the table thinking they're going to bring you some food. Now you start to complain about the fact that you have not received any food whatsoever to eat while everybody completed the meal. You're then told, don't complain. You should be glad that you were even invited to the dinner, that you had a seat at the table, and that you're even there. You shouldn't complain because, hey, at least you're at the table. Well, hold on a second. What do you mean? So, hey, your people couldn't even sit in a room like this. Whoa, 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 whoa. Where the fuck is this going? So, are you trying to gaslight me into not being self-aware to the point where I realize that I'm still owed something?
How about this? The dinner was at your house, but don't leave that part out. That I was already here. That most of these economic systems, most of these things that are presented to us, we had thousands of years ago in Africa. Most of these ideas. So I think that's the craziest part is where they brainwash you into thinking that the Vatican started this, or that the Greeks and the Romans and those are the most important societies that ever exist. No, no. They were all based on African societies. Kemet, Egypt, Kush, Ethiopia. So I think that's the toughest part, or the hardest part, as you get older and you become more educated or more worldly, whatever you want to call it. Then you're like, okay, I'm being played even worse than I imagined.
The apartment condo leasing companies still discriminate against black people when it comes to rental pricing and penalties applied for various reasons. Even look at higher mortgages for black homeowners or people who want to take out a loan from a bank to buy a home. But they'll have higher rates for the black person at the same bank that a white person is banking at in the same neighborhood that has a job in the same sector. At the same time, that white person is getting lower rates. And not just lower rates, but also a lower asking price.
Not just that, they're approved for more money. Like I said, what took place with me was when Roscoe knows my situation. I bought my first house in '98, and I was thinking about buying some rental property, buying another house, and they only authorized me for $90,000. So I'm thinking like, well, damn, I can't. At the time, I probably could have found some place, but I was like, that's not very much. A friend of mine applied. Now, different bank, I will say that, but they were granted $230,000. Now this is about 15, 16 years. Oh, I'm lying. This is.
Did you work at the same company?
This is about 17 years ago. So that's when you start realizing. Or
did he have like the same level job as you?
No, he was higher than me, yes, but he hadn't been higher than me very long. I was a manager at the time, and he was in management a little bit longer than me. But the reason is, I gotta word this correctly. The reason it's so confusing is because when we talk about redlining, this is what they do. When you give them your zip code, and he's black, so he doesn't need as much. And I'm like, well, why can't I get enough money so I can start my business or, begin my process? And I did make some mistakes. What I should have done was use the equity I had in my home as collateral and bought some houses outright. So I did make some mistakes, but it's just odd that when he applies at the same time I apply, he's granted way more money than me. And so that's the frustrating part. That's the part that you like, okay, what am I doing wrong? And like I said, you start blaming yourself. You're like, oh, well, maybe it's because I'm high risk, or maybe it's because, no. And I think that's, like I said, that's how racism brainwashes you into rationalizing your own mistreatment.
So none of this is hyperbole. None of this is theory.
Nope, not at all.
In fact, this particular practice has been proven by a group of black and white couples working together to prove systemic racism. And so what they did is first they would go and they would find a house that they were targeting a certain area for this experiment. So they went and they found several houses actually. And first what they would do is they would send the black couple in to apply for it. And the mortgage company, the realtor, offered the black couple a higher price because then the white couple came in same day. They were offered the same house for about $75,000 cheaper. So I'm like, oh, there must be Negro tax on that thing. I don't want to buy that.
No, here's the thing that like my mom and your dad would talk about. Like if we were in certain white areas, my mom's like, you ever notice you never see for sale signs, you only see sold signs. That's the kind of stuff your dad would say to be like, oh, you never see for sale sign in this neighborhood. You only see sold. That's because when a certain demographic decides to buy, they call a realtor, and the realtor reaches out to their homies, and they're like, okay, yes, sell to this person. No, don't sell to that person. And that's what you deal with.
Yep. So real estate is one obvious representation of segregation and racism in the modern era. So before you get too relaxed and thinking, oh, well, it just ends there. You know it don't. Of course it doesn't. The creation of school systems in suburban areas that draw lines geographically to separate based on race. School district lines are major contributors to a segregation that still exists. It is the school district that operates as a magnifying lens on the accurate picture of race and economics in America. Racial isolation happens in school systems today because of racial bias within local school boards. A 1974 Supreme Court ruling found judges could not order desegregation across school district lines because school systems are ineffective at making desegregation decisions. I will say that again. School systems are ineffective at making desegregation decisions. That means there is bias. The courts have overseen staffing and transportation decisions to this day. In Georgia, school desegregation plans were not integrated until 1980. The year 1980. In 2014, a study found 300 school desegregation court orders nationwide and 41 in Georgia. There are estimates of 150 to 200 active orders still remaining in 2022. By changing the boundaries of the school district, you can either remedy or further entrench people into segregation. So one thing people don't understand about the South is one way racism still exists is through school system zoning. So this is a practice that is still common and is still fought tooth and nail to this day. So with the school systems, what they do down here is they will create a new school system and zone it based on the demographic of the area. So if they feel like an area is getting too dark, then they will rezone or create a new school system or new schools so that they can control the demographic of students in the school system.
You need to explain a little bit better what a school system is. So you literally have, you might have a big, the way it was for us, I remember we were kids, we were District 66, so it was huge at one point and got smaller and smaller. But so you have school districts and school zones. So a district is part of a larger zone. But what happens is if you say you go out to a suburb and you don't want to be part of that zone, you create your own district, which means you have your own school system. And so you have your own school system, and these other ones say, hey, you need to come into our league. Nope, we're our own thing. And you make the boundaries bigger or smaller as you see fit. So that's what you're doing. So you're no longer in Atlanta proper. Now you're in one of the suburbs. You're no longer in where I live, Omaha. Nope, you're Elkhorn. So we got our own school system, and that's how they control what the kids learn. That's how they control the demographic. And of course, you're gonna have a few stragglers who have enough money to live in those areas. So you might have 7 black kids out of 300, total students. So that's how they control that.
It's wild. People don't understand how these school systems will show you that racism is still real. But the South is something else, man. I am not a native of the South, so when I see this systemic racism, I'm like, holy shit, this shit is wild. But people, this good old boy mentality runs deep in these families, in financial institutions. Like, that shit is still around.
I remember when we were in high school, and I always bring up this book, but I can't remember the guy that wrote it. But he was like a police commissioner for like San Diego, and he said the two biggest pillars for racism, modern day racism, is the education system and the judicial system. And so what happens when people give these numbers? When blacks are more violent. No, blacks are arrested more times, but they're also acquitted more times for these crimes because they didn't do them. It's just the thing is, when cops arrest a black person, you assume they're guilty, and when they arrest a white person, then that's where that innocent until proven guilty comes in. And so, when you have that different mentality based on who you're arresting and how they look and how they appear to you, and it makes a big difference. Yes, blacks are arrested more, but they're also acquitted more because of faulty investigation. Or
watch this. So another place that you see modern day racism is in voting rights. And when the 2008 election came around, it was fucking crazy, man. They were blocking people from voting in Georgia, in these small ass towns with large black populations. They were using the sheriffs and the deputies and some randos with guns to intimidate people from voting. They would close down voting
early.
Early.
Yes, I remember
They
that.
were closing down voting early. In Alabama, they were blocking people, blocking roads that led to the voting polls purposely.
People were still in line. I remember those conversations. I remember seeing the news reports about that.
Right. Now, that's straight up racism. That's real racism. So let me park this for a second. People have forgotten what the difference is between prejudice and racism. And they just jump straight to racism. Oh, you're racist. I'm like, you have to have power to oppress people. Now, you can be prejudiced and, hate motherfuckers. That's fine.
That's your business.
Right. But once you go like full-fledged, straight up oppression with the shit, then you're a racist.
Oh, okay. I had a question for you. So this bugs me. So me and my wife were coming out of City Hall one time. I had to go to court. Coming out, and so you always see the black folks petitioning, so you don't have to have ID to vote, and you always see white folks petitioning, so you do have to have ID to vote. And both arguments are solid. Which one do you lean to, Roscoe? Should I have an ID to vote, or should I not have an ID to vote?
Well, you have to have an ID to drive.
Period.
And you need to have ID for employment. You have to have ID for paying taxes. Why not have ID for voting?
It was two black people. They both were professors at UNO. And they were like, yeah, there's a history of white folks not letting you vote because you didn't have ID. And so they're saying that's racist. And I'm like, damn. But so I asked them, what about voter fraud? And then they're like, well, voter fraud is very rare, yada, yada, yada. But I just remember being in high school and going on to college, reading about that shit. Whenever you read about corruption, it's always Chicago. It was Chicago or Philadelphia, where they talked about how many dead people voted. People have been dead for like 15 years, but they still voted, kind of thing. And so it was voter fraud. Voter fraud's a real thing. We make it seem like it's either more common than what it should be, or not common as it is. I don't know, but I thought having an ID, would take care of the voter fraud. I agree with you. You got to have an ID for everything else. You probably should have ID to vote, but they're saying no, you shouldn't. And then the Democrats always say, "What about the old black people?" But how come they never say about the old white people? Well, old black people, they've been voting for years and they don't have IDs. And I'm like, why wouldn't they? They're driving, So it was always they always use the old black person as an excuse for not having ID. But I'm like, you never say this about old white people. So white people, you expect to have ID
because they want those Democratic Negro votes.
I agree. I knew what you were going to say with that portion. So, but
you see the same thing happening now with these illegal immigrants coming in, and yes, they are not requiring any ID to vote. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. So, but you had these same people that were talking about they shouldn't have ID to vote, claiming that you have to have ID, voter ID, to even attend the primaries, to attend these rallies that they were having. So I'm like, hold up. So you can attend the rally with voter ID, but you want illegals to vote because you are hella thirsty for votes.
So you think these people that you let in illegally are going to vote for you? This whole over border thing was a scam. But here's this is the problem with prejudice and racism. If I speak out and say, "Hey, there's a bunch of illegals voting," then you're going to say I'm a racist for addressing their racial identity, their nationalism, or what? No, you're not. You're bringing up a real issue.
No, no, no. This is what it's about. It's like you want me to play by the rules,
But
but
you
you
don't.
got these motherfuckers coming in that you're saying they don't have to play by the rules. What the fuck is the point of playing by the rules?
Well, I got a good one. So, no, you know what? No, I don't. I don't have a good one. Keep going, brother. Because we're talking about racism. There's some other things out there. I think the biggest issue with racism when it comes to black folks is that black folks are supposed to vote Democrat and white folks are supposed to vote Republican, and that right there is the
Listen,
problem.
both of them don't give a fuck about you, so
Period. Point blank.
it doesn't matter anyway. But so the voting process is another example that you could see this, right? But one thing I want to go back to schools for a second and talk about is that racial bias is not the only determinant factor of the school's makeup. Money is the second largest factor.
Period.
This is what determines the difference between what could be and what's really happening. Because what could be sounds like some progressive bullshit. What's really happening sounds like some conservative bullshit. So, in politics, words are useless without funding. To see a politician's intent, look at their funding. The same applies to school systems. School systems with majority non-white students receive $23 billion less than the majority white school systems. So that money, man, that money, like you see all this money going into this. Now, what's crazy is that property taxes pay for a lot of the school systems. And, okay, that's fine. Yeah, everybody that has a house is paying property tax. So how is it that these white people, white schools are getting all this bread? It's not just from property taxes. It comes from other sources as well as government spending and local spending. But it's lopsided. So then you see schools that have majority black students have shittier supplies, but they have the money for better books and computers and field trips is available, but it's not being spent on the right thing. So what you got to look at is, again, the money. Look at the money and it'll show you the real intent. So then these schools are basically relying on philanthropy to help them, make the grade, so to speak. And so it becomes obvious that there is a serious problem between these majority non-white schools. Now, the crazy thing about it is, like, these places tend to be in the city or city centers. The property tax in those city centers is high. So where's that money being sent to? Because, I mean, in Fulton County, which is the county of the city of Atlanta, dude, you got to pay twice a year and it's fucking high. Compared to when you go outside the city and further out into the country, your property taxes are going to be low. So a big chunk of that needs to be going to these schools so these kids can have decent supplies that they need to be on par with these white schools that get all this funding.
Complicated conversation because some of those schools actually get less money, but it's a whole different. How do I say this? It's a whole. I remember being a kid. They would talk about the Catholic schools. They don't get as much money, but they have a better graduation rate. Blah blah blah. But
No. What you don't understand is they get their money from the Catholic Church.
I was going there. So yeah, they get less money from the state in the federal government, but they have a stepdaddy. They got a godfather, the Catholic Church. So yeah, they make their money. They get their money and they spend it differently. So that the whole idea, how do you say this? The whole idea that they're doing it for less money, they're not doing it for less money. The money just is hidden better, I guess. And so now the graduation rate, it's a cultural thing. I dig it. You were told from a young age that this is how it's going to go, yada yada yada. But
the church bought the fucking field and built those shitty houses on a water table. I was furious. I'm like, what the fuck is a church doing with the money
slow down
to build homes and develop homes?
You gotta hold it. You gotta explain that a little bit more. I remember when we were kids, and you used to call it the field. I used to call it empty lot. That's what my mom called it. And we were told they could not build houses there because it was a high water table. And lo and behold, me and you leave. We come back. There's houses there, and I'm like, dude. So were they lying to us about the water table, or?
It's funny. Those houses were not there our senior year.
No, not at all.
When we fucking left and came back, they were there, and I'm like, motherfucker, they just slapped this shit up like my dad used to talk about. I said, a tornado come by and rip that bullshit out the ground.
Look, my dad told me, I was 2 years old. My dad told me, there's a high water table over there. And I'm like, okay, so that's why they don't build houses there. So, but this goes back to one of our past shows where you talked about, hey, if you're going to build a house, you need to look at the grade. If you're going to buy the land and put a house on, you need to see where the water naturally runs. You need to wait months before you build your house.
And you were saying another reason why it's shitty to fucking build a house there is because it's a valley. Like it's a small valley. Like water's coming down from the top of the hill where Ricky is up there, from my side, the hill behind me, and the fucking the Mount Everest hill that we used to sled down on the side of this school. Like
we need to get off this, but there's one thing I want to say. I remember when a certain individual had a garden over there. Remember, he rarely watered it. He didn't have to water it.
Because they were pulling from the water that was down below.
Yes. Yeah, because in the water ran,
and he thought he was really doing some shit. He wasn't doing a fucking thing.
They know God, but again, hold up. So here's one of the biggest things about racism that we low key don't pay attention to. They tell you, or they encourage you to go into certain fields or arts or whatever. Like, oh, niggas ain't farmer. Niggas don't farm. Black people don't farm. This shit like that. And black farmers was one of the biggest things out there. Black farmers have a huge lawsuit going on right now because they intentionally sold them bad seeds. Agriculture is how we started, and so what happens is you're told or you're herded in a certain direction. One of the things that they got us on is this education thing. There's so many. Look, the reason I always talk about black women is because I date black women and I love them. I'm married to a black woman, but you would always hear all these women getting master's degrees and they weren't doing shit with them or they weren't furthering. And I'm like, are you just getting that degree to say you got it? Because you're not making more money. That they hurt us in a certain direction socially, and we fall for it, not realizing that all we're doing is contributing to an industry that hasn't contributed back to us. You see these people. How many you dated a few women? How many women have you dated and they said they got a master's and you find out they spent $90,000 or $120,000 on that master's degree? And I'm like, how much are you making?
That's a fucking house.
I'm like, so
you've been better off getting a home loan for a rental property, selling that or keeping the rental property, and that shit would make money for you.
On the flip side, I was a Sunday school teacher, and I would encourage my kids. I'm like, look, if you're going to go to college, do it. If that's for you, do it. Not yada. I would just tell them, like, look, don't go to college until you're ready, because that is a waste of money. People stay in college for 6-7 years and change their majors a bunch of times. So don't go till you're ready. Second, the kids would tell me, oh, I don't want to get no loans. I'm like, wait a minute. So you want to get a car loan for a $30,000-$40,000 car, but you won't get a loan to help yourself. And I'm like, look, you do know if you miss 4 payments, they'll repossess that car. But if you miss that student loan payment and you graduated, they can't take your degree back. Now, I'm sure Elon's going to work on that with that neural net bullshit. But what I'm saying is that you literally are afraid of getting a loan to get to better yourself. So, like I said, I'm not this guy that says you got to go to school or you got to finish college, or if you're going to go to school for a particular trade and you hone your skills, there's ways around it. You don't have to contribute to this. Here's how we're brainwashed. Back in the day, when you see Mexicans and people come from other countries and you see them live, maybe 4 or 5 families in one house. Black folks used to do that shit, and then you would get out on your own when you were ready. You would start a family, whatever. But now we're like, put your kid out at 18. And I'm like, that's frustrating because now, if you come from a family with, mom, dad, maybe 4 or 5 kids, well, that's 4 or 5 phone bills. You know what I'm saying? That's 6 phone bills. That's 7 cable bills. And
no,
so
no, I disagree. So this is the problem. The problem is you have to stop enabling these fucking kids and make them pay their own fucking phone bill. And you have to teach them how to get out there from the very beginning. This is the problem. You got to teach them how to make money at an early age so that when they do get out there, they are not hamstrung by their overdependence on the parent.
Okay, slow down. I wasn't referring to the overdependence part. What I'm saying is that if y'all all live in the same house and you're contributing to one pot, when it's time for you to leave and branch out on your own, you're not coming back. Number one. Number two, society gives mixed signals. They'll tell one aspect of one demographic to do this, but they tell another demographic to do this and live here. And
listen. Most of this comes from the woman, and I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna say it. The women that baby the shit out of their fucking children, and allow them to stay home forever, and wound up wasting so much time when that child can be out in the world learning things, getting people skills, making small investments that lead to bigger investments, but their parents enable them. Oh, you don't have to. You can stay here. No, get the fuck out. Get the fuck out and go be an adult. I raised you so that you can take care of yourself. Now is the time for you to take care of yourself. Now, people may disagree with me, but I say, listen, I will teach you to save your money, and I'm going to save some money so that when you're from 18 to 21, you will have your own apartment, okay? And you will learn how to be an adult, how to keep your shit together, and how to save your money, and how to fucking invest your money. But what you won't be doing is living up under me, eating up my fucking food, burning my electricity, using up all this fucking water, spending 30 minutes in the fucking shower. No, we're not fucking doing that. You are an adult now. It's time for you to go. But I can't vote. I can't own a firearm. It doesn't matter. You can still have an apartment. You can have an apartment, or, you know what I'm saying, you can have like your first house that maybe we can help you to buy one at that age, and you can turn around and sell it and flip it, or use it as have a rental property and a duplex on one side and you live in the other one. Either way, you're going to learn how to get out the fucking nest and fly your ass on, because that's what you're supposed to do.
But hold it. So here, I have a complaint. Here's my complaint. So now you send your kid off to college, and what you should have taught them at the house, now they're learning at an institution for $30,000 a semester. And then when they graduate in 4 or 5 or 6 years, they're saddled with a shitload of debt. That's what I referred to. It's like there's other ways of doing this. Or, here's what I mean by brainwashing the consumer is we'll watch a TV show and...
But see, hold on. We got the whole game fucked up talking about loans for school. How about just no loans for school and fucking just save and fucking pay for school You know what I'm saying? So that way, hey, when you go to college, you're not worried about the fucking bill. You just go and you get the degree and you just use that, you know what I'm saying, to further yourself, in whatever way possible. Because what we're doing is we're also teaching you how to start your own business. See, this is the thing. This is the problem. This is the problem. Everybody gives this boilerplate conversation strategy to their kid. They're like, hey, you go to college and then you'll get a job. Well, son, what do you like to do? What are you really good at? So let's look at that and figure out how to make money off of that shit.
How to build from there. No, what I was going to say is my mom had a professor that every
Because,
time.
son, what I'm going to tell you is that you can work for people the rest of your life and be miserable and get slowly crushed under the wheels of progress and shuffled along with all these new innovations, or you can get your ideas out there into the world, have an impact, make a living off of that, and really have some satisfaction in the life that you're living.
Look, there's no wrong answer, but all I was saying is, mom had a professor that whenever he had a kid, he bought a house for the kid. Now, of course, the kid don't live in the house, but what happens when the kid turn 18 and go to college? He's like, look, you have a choice. You can sell the house, take that money and go to college. You can live in the house and develop whatever skills you want, or again, you could sell the house and invest in whatever you want to go. So they had three choices.
That's brilliant.
But
That's fucking brilliant.
so, like I said, what you're talking about, there's strategies for it. It's just this goes back to the whole racism part.
Because you know what that is right there? That's a fucking inheritance.
Yeah, it's
That's
on so many levels.
profound.
It's on so many levels. But what I'm saying is, at certain schools they teach certain things. I went to Benson, it was supposed to be a trade school, so they were a lot big on the trades. But back in the day when you graduated high school, you were a freaking adult, and so going to college was for the fancy city folks. Everybody else started their trade right away, whether they were carpenters, plumbers, whatever. And the thing is, I was taught early on, which I didn't understand, is that, again, we talk about this. You get a trade and you're the business. So if you have a trade, you can do that trade while you're in college. You can cut hair, you can lay floors, you can do whatever it is. And so black folks, we ran that shit. Now everybody ran us out of those things. And when you bring up trades now, a few years ago, not necessarily right now, black folks would frown at you. 10, 15 years ago, trade. I went to college. Yeah, and you got a bunch of loans, motherfucker.
And all you can do is eat cheese and wine at fancy parties and with a bunch of fake motherfuckers and who are faking it till they make it. That's cool. You can go live that life. You'll have culture. You know what I'm saying? That's cool. That's cool. You can have all that shit. Or you can actually make shit happen. See, if you're ever in the room with people who make shit happen, they have a different outlook on life.
About everything, a different mentality when it comes to anything, money, success, marriage. Like they have a whole strategy, and you're like, you damn, you thought about that? And so that's when you realize, like, yeah, these motherfuckers are in control. And I think that's the problem with racism. That I want to say something that's going to sound really kind of counterintuitive, but the reason white folks don't understand racism is because once they make a decision, there are no other outside factors that influence that decision.
Right.
But when you're black, I'm okay. I'm gonna give an example. Growing up, my mom had a white Benz. She had a Benz 190, and I had the car at one point, and I would park her car at my house because she didn't have room. So one time I had to drive down Lake Street and I got stopped 3 times by police officers because I had the tags in the window because somebody stole the tags off it. So instead of leaving them on the outside of the vehicle, I put them on the inside of the vehicle. So I'm transporting the vehicle from my mom's house to my house. And I'm cool until I hit Lake Street. And on Lake Street, I get stopped 3 times. And I'm like, hey,
tell them where Lake Street is.
It's in the heart
it cuts through the middle of the black part of town.
Yeah, it dissects it. So I get stopped, and I show the guy. I give him all the information. Like, okay, he said, I understand, cool. I go down, I go down not even a mile. I get stopped by a different police officer, and I'm like, "Ain't that nigga back there radio you?" So I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then right when I get to, I think the lake stops on 42nd, I get stopped again. I'm like, "I'm going. I live on Seward. I'm going home." But the reason I bring that up is because when I got stopped, there are other
But
cars with
see,
bad tags.
here's the deal though. What people aren't getting about this is that they were all on the same frequency.
There's no way that they
Were they
didn't
all
hear.
white cops?
Oh yeah, yes. There was no way they didn't hear "nigga" in a Benz. But let me explain this to white people so they understand that I'm getting stopped 3 times by police officers. Now I had everything I needed. Luckily they weren't malicious, but as a black man, when you get stopped by the police, you do not know how this episode is going to end. You do. I I've been handcuffed before, and I'll explain that in a different episode. But that's what I mean when you talk about institutionalized racism. So I'm simply transporting a vehicle. I have tags, I have insurance, I have registration, but I have them in the window, and I get stopped several times. Other cars going by. But what I mean by this is that I could have ended up in jail. I could have got scared and ran and got shot in the back. There's so many different things that happen
But
with
you
police
didn't
encounters.
because you know how to handle yourself.
Yeah, hey, we had good parents. We knew what was up. But this is what I'm talking about. There are no outside influences that fuck with white folks, and when it does, y'all protest differently. Y'all call your congressman. But that's the problem with it's not I shouldn't say that's not the problem with being black. That's the problem with the situation is that there's somebody else that can influence your situation
Faster.
on the
You
out.
get a faster outcome.
Yeah, a faster negative outcome. Don't leave the negative part out. So that's what we're talking about. And I'm not making this story up. This has really happened to me. And so again, I'm not scared. The same thing happens. I would drive back from Memphis. I would drive all the way from Memphis. I get stopped, but I would get to Lake Street and get stopped. Oh, you were speeding. I was 5 miles over. So these are again.
They pull you over for going 5 miles over?
Yeah, that's happened to me. And so the point I'm trying to make is that if they see a nigga in a nice car, that triggers cops.
What
Now,
did they say when you told them you're going 5 miles over?
oh, what I said was, hey, I'm driving from Memphis. I just got home. And the cop would go, because he would see like the dead bugs on the windshield and shit. He's like, oh man, get home safe. They would always let me go. But they would stop me. Literally, he was like, "Hey, you know you're speeding." I'm like, "Yeah, I just got off the interstate. I'm coming back from Memphis." Oh, okay, cool. It's happened twice. I don't want to say more than twice because I can recall 2 situations where I'm literally getting off the interstate, zipping down Lake Street. So,
Do you ever get pulled over by any black cops?
Yeah, I've been pulled over by a black cop.
For what?
I'm think his last name was Young. I think he was related to one of our people. But what? This is a tough one. Something happened, but it wasn't pulled over. It was something else. I talked to him. I think I know most of black cops. That's the crazy part. I think I know a few black cops. I'm thinking really hard. I've been pulled over by female cops. I don't remember being pulled over by black cops. Not for speeding anyway. I do remember. I was going our 24-hour fitness. I used to go to work out at 3 o'clock in the morning because I was overweight. So I was driving a Cadillac. I just bought the Cadillac from the auction, from U.S. Marshals. No, Salvation. It was a different auction. And I'm driving it. Black cop pulled me over because I didn't have tags and everything. And I said, I just bought the car. And I hand him the bill of sale. And he goes, "You bought a car for how much?" I said, "Yeah, I bought it for like $1,100. He said, "Shit, that's a deal." And told me to go on. I said, "Yeah, I'm just going to 24-hour fitness to work out." Again, as soon he looked at when I handed him the paper, he was more concerned with how much I paid for the Cadillac.
Right, exactly.
But that is a true story. It was a blue Cadillac, like a '94. Bought it in probably '99, maybe 2000. And I was So okay. I have been.
Gotcha. All right.
You asked if I pulled over a black cop.
I got it. All right, let's move on. All right, so one mortgage company with a C+ or a low credit score customers, they bundle or trench dozens of those mortgages and sell them to financial institutions as securities. The same thing happened with the Goldman Sachs scandal. But this happens to people of a certain demographic. This is the Straw Man World Series. So, just to show you how they play with these people's livelihoods, pretty much. Because when these things happen, when these C plus or low credit score customers' mortgages get sold to other companies, they can turn around and jack up the interest rate super high so that you're paying X amount in July. And then August, within this like 3-week cycle when this deal happened, you weren't told that the new rate went up by 15%. And now you can barely pay this fucking mortgage because your money's tight. But it happens. It happens, and it's a mechanism that's done to take property from people. Another form of institutional racism. But I want to move on to the Flint water crisis. Flint is the latest manifestation of a problem that civil rights advocates have described as environmental racism. A problem that gained focus in the late 80s and early 90s when a series of studies revealed that the state and local governments routinely make decisions about pollution that disproportionately harms low-income communities, black people. Too often, state and local leaders hit the mute button when African American families raise questions or concerns about the health and safety of their communities. Or worse, reportedly, as happened in Flint, local leaders making empty promises to communities about the risks that they face. In Flint, if government officials had listened and residents could have been spared the exposure to dangerous toxins like lead, it wouldn't have happened. Lead poisoning has extremely dangerous effects on health, especially young people. Exposure to lead can lead to developmental delays, learning difficulties, and hearing loss. A recent medical study found that the proportion of children living in Flint with elevated lead levels had doubled since the city changed its drinking water source. There are horrible disparities seen in children under 15 months old. One can only imagine the true impact the crisis will have on the current and future generations of young people in Flint. And all this was done because of the water sources were being sold. The water rights were being sold.
Right, yes.
People don't understand that water rights are really important. Water rights came up with the Keystone Pipeline Standing Rock protest in Native Americans. But it's unlikely one of the key reasons officials did not spend its diminished political power of African Americans in Flint over the last several years. A Michigan state law, Public Act 436, grants the governor power to appoint emergency managers to run cities, towns, and school districts deemed to be in financial distress. So that person's a liquidator, basically. This power has been invoked frequently in Michigan and other states, primarily in areas that are home to large numbers of black voters. These appointed individuals effectively strip political power away from locally elected officials. Oh, so I see what's going on here. That person is an economic hitman, and he is running deals while he is liquidating these government assets and selling off rights to land and resources and water. This guy is cutting deals with outside companies. You saw this recently with the floods in North Carolina, north of Charlotte this month, because when the first ex-military people were flying in their own vehicles, in their own craft to help people, they found people from the state of Michigan that were paid to be there. The governor of North Carolina allowed different states to bid on disaster capitalism. They allowed them to bid on who could come in and do the cleanup. And these guys that were former special operators in the United States military said these guys that came down from Michigan weren't really about helping themselves. They just wanted to do a job because they had a contract to do some basic work, but not really help anybody. And it was the guy that was hired from Michigan by the governor was given control over the airwaves, over the air traffic control airwaves. And so this asshole was the one that was preventing people who own helicopters from landing in there and dropping off supplies. All because they got the bid by the governor to do some of that work, which they weren't doing. It wasn't an emergency. They said when these men appeared, they did not have any air of emergency or urgency about them. But I'm just bringing them up to illustrate these people, these economic hitmen who come in at a time where disaster capitalism is being used to make money from people in distress. And black people had their water resources stolen from them. And because of that, they suffered with environmental racism.
No, what I was saying is you said that the governor had the ability to appoint people. So where's the democracy? I got city officials and people that I'm voting for.
Right.
Waterworks.
Because it's considered a state of emergency, and so in state of emergency, they can enact political martial law.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing. So the democracy don't even matter. And don't forget about the black brother that went up there and took his water machine up there where it pulls water from the atmosphere, and he was giving them people in Flint water, and came back and somebody had destroyed his machine, and he said, "No, this ain't no vandal." He said the person who did this, they were an engineer. So don't forget about that part. He was ex-military too. Like I said, racism is so commonplace and so normal. We walk by it and don't say shit or don't recognize it, or we don't see it for racism. We see it as, oh man, that's just how it is. No, it's not. It doesn't have to be this way. And the only way you're going to fix it is by speaking up and doing something about it, or making your shit known. But we're seeing land being taken. We're seeing kids undereducated or improperly educated. We're seeing people who are part of a society that we're just consumers. We simply spend money and we don't get any results. We don't get any. So that's where you have to change yourself so racism doesn't affect you, and you get out there and get what you need. And when it does happen, then you need to know how to properly address the issue, fight it. You need to know who to call. You need to know what lawyer that you need to get, that kind of stuff. My mom sued Burger King. My mom sued Yonkers. My mom sued all kinds of people when she first moved out here because she came from Cali, and she said we weren't used to that kind of, being treated this way. So when I got here and I wasn't treated properly, my mom sued a bunch of places. I know that sounds terrible, but it's true.
No, but she had to pay for that band somehow. So, but listen, we're going to close on police. A team of researchers at the Boston University School of Public Health recently found that the kind of racism that's woven into laws and policies also informs racial disparities in police violence. Their findings were released in a paper called The Relationship Between Structural Racism and Black-White Disparities in Fatal Police Shootings at the State Level. This was also published in the Journal of National Medical Association. For this study, a research group led by community health sciences professor Michael Siegel looked at the data on fatal police shootings between 2013 and 2017 from the Mapping Police Violence database. Would love to check that out. And then ran that along 5 key indicators of systemic racism, racial segregation, incarceration, rate gaps, educational attainment gaps, the economic disparity index, and employment disparity gaps for each state. Wow. The worse that African Americans are doing on those 5 fronts compared to white people, the higher the states score on what researchers call a state racism index. Very interesting. If a state scores high on those 5 factors, and also happens to have a high per capita rate of unarmed African Americans shot and killed by police, then structural racism serves as a worthy explanation for police violence in those states. The research team controlled their analysis by considering other factors of each state's population size, non-homicide violent crime rate, household gun ownership, and the proportion of population living in urban areas. They found that structural racism does positively correlate with higher levels of police killings of African Americans. For every 10-point increase in the state racism index, there's a corresponding 24% increase in the ratio of unarmed black people killed by police compared to white people killed in the same conditions. This was true for the nation when looking at the state results in the aggregate. Racial segregation was the most significant predictor among the 5 state racism index factors for this outcome. Before this study, there were 2 general schools of thought on the racial disparities in police killings of unarmed black suspects. First, the threat hypothesis, which reflects influence of racism on police interaction with African Americans, and the community violence hypothesis, the second one, which supposes that higher rates of violent crime in black neighborhoods might explain higher rates of police shootings of African Americans. So you have 2 right there, right? You have the first one, which is the threat hypothesis, and then you have the second one, which is the community violence hypothesis. So, the head of the study, Siegel, he said that both are contributors but don't totally explain the disparities. Even when controlling for both overall rate of black population shootings and black arrest rates, structural racism was still a significant positive predictor of police shootings of unarmed black suspects. The best state examples for seeing how structural racism might influence police violence against African Americans were in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois. Amazing. They're all in the Midwest, which register the highest on the state racism index and have some of the highest rates of unarmed African Americans shot by police. I know Illinois does.
Look, we had this talk years ago, even the last 2 podcasts where we talked about everybody assumes the South is going to be more racist than anywhere else.
It is, but it's on a plantation, invisible, glass ceiling, school system kind of way.
Oh, hold it. Y'all don't shoot as many niggas is what I'm saying. How about that part? See, they'll oppress a nigga, but they won't shoot him for no reason. But this goes back also to the past podcast when you talked about lawfare, where when they use the law to basically be racist. They use these laws, and what they'll do is they'll enforce a law on a black person for smoking weed, but it's 19 other white people walking by and smoking weed too, but they don't arrest them. That's another thing. How the law is applied is a big part of that. And then once you have an encounter with an officer, you can go left, really quickly. But yeah, what you just said, the law index. The racist index. That's interesting. So you saying it's worse in the Midwest? Milwaukee. You said Illinois. What was the other one?
So Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin.
So. Yeah, that's where that Orlando Castile was in Minnesota.
So, one might apply this study to see if it explains the police killing of Dontre Hamilton, an unarmed African American who suffered from a mental disorder, who was police shot 14 times in 2014, or the Facebook Live post police killing of Orlando Castile in 2016. Who was unarmed when police shot him in an area outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. Or you could look at any of the hundreds of police killings occurred in Chicago over the past few years to see if the lessons of this study applies?
Look, like I said, racism has the ability to make you doubt that it exists, and that it's applied differently for different people. One of the
This
things
is the difference between the South and the Midwest. In the South, the plantation has been transferred into a MK Ultra level. That's where they are. They are on some MK Ultra type of shit in the South now. Now, it seems like the Midwest is using the South playbook from the 1950s. You know what I'm saying? Like they going back with it. You know, like, oh, we missed out on all that good shit down there. We're going to beat some niggas up and kill them up here. And that's what's happening. It's like it's the roles got reversed.
like I said, me and you talk about this. When King went to Cicero, Illinois, he got beat up worse there than Mobile or anywhere else. I never. So we're laughing and we're joking, but even when I talked about this on a past podcast, I had a young lady that was African American, black, whatever you want to call her, and she was saying, "Well, my manager's not racist because he let such and such do this." I'm like, "He can't be racist because he let a Mexican." I'm like, "Okay, so that's the thing about racism. It don't make sense. Even though she's not pure white, she's still whiter than you." And you need to look at everybody that's been written up in your sector. And I explained to her, I said, 97% of the people who got in trouble are all black, male, female, whatever. Everybody else, they got warnings. I said, I'm your union rep. I can't do anything about it. But if you file a claim, I can be a witness. And that's how I stated it. I'm telling you. Well, what about, I said, I can't tell you what people are going through, but I'm telling you based on my experience. I know who's getting in trouble and who's not. I know who I had to defend and who I didn't have to defend. And I'm telling you, 97% black.
Well, in closing, I'll put it to you like this. Beware. Beware the beast man. Shun him, for he will murder his brother. So, listen. You have economic racism. You have environmental racism. You have systemic police racism. You have financial, institutional, economic racism, in so many different forms. You have school systemic racism. So it is real. It's still alive and well. And it's out there. Be mindful of this and act accordingly to fight against it. That's all I got. We out. Peace.
Alabama.